I should probably rank this, right? Like, I did all the movies and it seems like it would be a good idea. Why don't we do that?
I don't want to scare anyone, but I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason.
Did you know that a young boy drowned?
Legend has it that Jason saw his mother beheaded that night, and he took his revenge. A revenge that he'll continue to seek if anyone ever enters his wilderness again.
Welcome everybody. Here we are after this long journey of 12 Friday the 13th movies. We have finally arrived to the goddamn Friday the 13th ranking. But I don't know how to objectively rank a series of movies that appeal to me more on a personal level than a critical level. I mean, honestly, with the affection I have for this franchise, it'd be kind of like ranking my kids if there was that one like shitty kid that I never talked to. But I will be doing my best, and to establish some sort of criteria, I'm not going to be looking at each movie in how they follow the rules or the lore of these movies. As important as that is to me, I really will be looking at these movies based off of how much they entertained me, how much they engaged me, and just how much fun I had with them. But getting that out of the way, here we are, no holds barred. We are about to rank the Friday the 13th series. And at number 12, you know it's Jason Takes Manhattan. It had to be Jason Takes Manhattan. Everybody who watched my review of that movie knew that this was destined to be at the bottom, because it is just a misfire on all accounts. And not only does it get everything wrong, but it gets it wrong in the blandest, most disengaged way possible. The actors don't try to bring any charisma on screen. I mean, they probably knew they were in a shitty movie, so why should they care? Despite the fact that it invented clickbait, however, I think the actual real offense of this movie, like the criminal offense, the one that really cements its place at the bottom of this franchise, is what it does to my buddy Jason. Jason was more effectively utilized in the first movie as a zombie child than he is walking around with this slime coated on him through every frame of the movie, taken out by sewage waste that turns him into a child. And unfortunately, Kane Hodder's talents are just absolutely wasted on this role, and while I'm sure he really cared, and I'm sure he really put a lot of attempt and effort to make this Jason just as much of a standout as his other performances, none of that reflects in the actual portrayal because of just how much the filmmakers let the character down with this one. So there you go, number 12, Jason Takes Manhattan. And at number 11, we have Jason X. Here we have another movie where the filmmaker's best idea was to take Jason out of Crystal Lake and to put him somewhere else. This time, though, to more of an extreme that actually gained some comedic mileage. While I resent New Line Cinema's direction that they took this franchise and the fact that they clearly had no idea what they were doing, seriously, the movie studios that made Lord of the Rings couldn't figure out how to make a Friday the 13th movie. That being said, I don't really hold that against this particular film because obviously the filmmakers had fun making this. They did try to bring some level of energy to the table. They brought some ideas, some worked, some didn't. And the enjoyment that's being felt by the cast and crew does reflect somewhat onto the film. Not enough to save it from those terribly, painfully dated CGI effects or that murky, just ugly cinematography that I don't even know what you would classify that as. I guess honestly, it reminded me of an Asylum movie, which, I mean, Friday the 13th has never been like, you know, the standard of cinematography. But these movies never looked as bad as they did in Jason X. The best thing I can say about it is the fact that it's not as bad as it could have been. This could have been an atrocity. This could have really offended me as a Friday the 13th fan. But it just didn't really hold my interest enough one way or the other. I wouldn't mind revisiting it, but I don't really see that happening. At number 10, guys, I said I was not a fan of this movie, and I meant it. Friday the 13th, Part 3. I know, it's the fan favorite. Jason gets the hockey mask for the first time. Whatever anyone else sees in this movie, I'm afraid I just see an uninspired, lazy, bland sequel. One that sacrificed character and suspense for special effects shots that must have looked cool in 1982 3D and absolutely no other place and time. Of course, this one did set up the template for the Friday the 13th format. namely by cementing the persona of Jason, which we'll get into in a second. I suppose I have much to thank Friday the 13th Part 3D for, but that doesn't actually save its merits as a film. Again, I'm judging these off of how much they entertained me, and at times this movie bores me to tears. How many tense and riveting barn scenes can you have in a movie? I think this one maxes out at 2. But as mean as I'm being, this movie is not without its redeeming qualities. Actually, that goofy atmosphere that the film establishes with that disco music in the credits actually lends it this kind of so bad that it's good charm. I think that's what Jason X and some other movies in this franchise were aiming for, but this one I think really plays off of that type of energy more so than any other. I mean, just some of the acting alone in this movie, So for better or worse, there is a certain level of entertainment value to be found in sections, in specific places of this movie. And while it miserably fails at being a horror film, it actually does decently as a slasher flick, namely with some really fantastic kills, actually some of my favorite kills in the franchise. And if there is one definitive saving grace of this movie, it would have to be Richard Brooker as Jason Voorhees. This man essentially wrote like the manifesto on Jason Voorhees for future actors. And you could argue that it was Richard Brooker's portrayal that elevated Jason Voorhees to a cultural icon. And he is pretty menacing on screen as well, when he actually is allowed to be on screen. So this one obviously has its fan base, and I can understand, but for me, it's a stepping stone to better things. So that's why Part 3 is number 10. At number 9, we have one of the most controversial entries of this series, Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. Honestly, it was a toss between this and Part 3 because I don't particularly love either one of them, and both of them are extremely problematic for their own different reasons. But I had to give the edge to Part 5 because the filmmakers, I think, were just a lot bolder with this one. They took a lot of risky moves, some that definitely didn't pay off, but I at least respect the attempt to move this franchise in a different direction. As a standalone movie, there's not a lot I can say to really defend it. The sleazy Skinamax tone that John Steinman brought really does amp up the cringe factor. And while I say things like bold, I mean, this isn't avant-garde or anything. It is a very formulaic slasher film when you really get down to it. And let's not forget that you have some of the most ear-grating, just annoying characters of the entire franchise. And while Part 3 had terribly bland characters, they didn't annoy me to this level. But that's also the difference. Part 5 does provoke an actual reaction out of me one way or the other, which honestly I would rather be aggravated than bored to an extent. And Danny Steinman did bring a certain kind of unique energy to this movie. There's never a dull moment on screen. It doesn't feel tedious or monotonous like Part 3 did. And ultimately, this movie is saved by the tormented performance by John Shepherd. I mean, this is the type of performance that you just don't see enough in slasher movies. One that actually seriously commits to realizing the trauma that would be suffered by a protagonist of this kind of film series. John Shepherd was just enough to give this movie an actual, a dramatic core that sustained it just enough to be put above Part 3. So, as uneven as it is, as much of a mess as it is, I would certainly rather sit down with Part 5 because it just has more to offer for me. So that's why that one is at number 9. At number 8, we have the original Friday the 13th. Now, an interesting little tidbit about this one. When I originally wrote down the ranking list for this video, I forgot to include Part 1. I forgot to include the original Friday the 13th in the Friday the 13th ranking. And that just speaks to the fact that the legacy of this franchise hasn't been especially kind to this original film. There's not a lot of value that this one will hold for modern audiences, and there's just not a sense of importance with this original film. As schlocky as some of those sequels are, they are elevated somewhat by being in the presence of a cultural icon, and that does lend a sense of significance to these other movies that's just lacking in this one. It just is a slightly above average slasher film for the time. It's not an abysmal film like some people say. It's more technically competent. It's definitely more of a cohesive story, but it's not the mess that some of those other films are. And so it deserves to be placed higher, but at the same time, I mean, but aside from some great effects, admittedly, by Tom Savini, and by a really creepy and sinister performance by Betsy Palmer, there's just not a whole lot to say about this original movie. And while it tries to introduce that murder mystery angle to try and, I don't know, give it some kind of distinction, something to make it not just a Halloween ripoff, nothing ever comes out of that angle. I mean, the characters don't even know that they're in danger until like the last, 20 minutes in the movie. And then the killer is revealed 5 minutes later. No tension is ever built. It's clearly an afterthought, not something the writers actually wanted to deal with and develop. What it is just a missed opportunity. This movie maybe could have been more than the sum of its parts, but the only thing it managed to do was, like part 3, lead to bigger things. So guys, I know I've been a little harsh about the movie so far, but this is the part in the ranking where we're actually getting to the films that I either really like or just flat out love. And that's starting at the number 7 position, Jason Goes to Hell. You're not ever going to see anybody else probably rank Jason Goes to Hell this highly in my ranking, but I can't help it. I think this movie is fine schlock. It is a wonderfully enjoyable B-movie that knows exactly what it's trying to be. While this movie's only remembered for the odd, weird, sort of bizarrely experimental aspects, nobody talks about the fact that it's very much grounded by likable and endearing characters that really guide you through this chaotic nightmare and save it from becoming a mess. I've often heard Jason Goes to Hell is described as being a entirely incoherent story. It's really not a mess, it's just out there. And if you're willing to accept it on its own terms, I think you will honestly have a very good time with Jason Goes to Hell. Just as a horror movie, there's so much more atmosphere here, so much more craftsmanship, along with some wonderful practical effect sequences. I mean, I just can't in any good conscience put this below part 3, part 8, whatever. That being said, Jason's presence is certainly missed throughout this film, especially because of that badass design that they gave him in the opening. Seriously, I need like a poster of that or something. And one odd shaving scene aside, Adam Marcus is clearly in control of this material. He knows just how to play the audience. And in no technical sense is this movie worse than any of the films below it. It's just not. So despite being a problematic Friday the 13th movie, it is a very entertaining monster movie, so I would say check it out on those merits. At number 6, we have Freddy vs. Jason. Now, I'm sort of bending my own rules here, but if I were judging this sheerly off of how entertaining it was, it would be much higher. And it seems really unfair to compare this movie with the others because it has 2 horror icons to boast. And because of this, I have a hard time objectively viewing this. So if I judge it as a Friday the 13th movie, you have to really acknowledge the elephant in the room, and that's Ken Kirzinger as Jason Voorhees. When you see these 2 titans of terrorists go toe-to-toe, you want them to both bring their A game. Robert Englund certainly did, and Ken Kirzinger certainly didn't. He was just sleepwalking through the whole movie. I don't know what they were going for. I think they were trying to bring a more sympathetic edge to Jason, which normally I would be totally all for, but they didn't seem to know how to realize that, and so he just kind of lumbers around and it just gets bullied by Freddy, which is not the most satisfying thing to watch as a Friday the 13th fan. So really keeping everything in mind, how I have to judge it as a standalone movie, how I have to judge it as a Friday the 13th movie, it gets very complicated, but I do have to honestly say that it underwhelmed me as a Friday the 13th fan. And while Jason Goes to Hell broke rules, it did it in a way that was fresh and creative and not horribly disappointing like some of what they did in Freddy vs. Jason. So as wonderfully entertaining as it is and as much as I recommend it, I have to put it at number 6. But don't let that fool you for how much of a good time and just how much of a blast I had with this film. At number 5, we have Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. Another one you will find near the bottom of people's rankings usually, which I just don't understand. People complain about the different direction that this movie took the Friday the 13th series, and well, yeah, it did, and it led to one of the most spectacular set pieces of the entire franchises, counting Freddy vs. Jason. I mean, just as a showcase for special effects work and stunt choreography, all those kinds of things, this movie is a wonder to behold, because they made this movie for what, like $1 million, $2 million? And what they did here had me on the edge of my seat more than anything in like the last 3 Transformers movies. People will always complain about Tina being a Carrie ripoff, and you know what, you can go ahead and say that. All I can say is that just writing her off that way really doesn't acknowledge how much Lara Park Lincoln brought to that role, because she brought a real vulnerability that, just like John Shepard, actually made Tina feel like a real person, like an actual human being, and that brought more stakes to this Friday the 13th. And not only is there great special effects to watch, not only is there a huge spectacle, but I did actually feel some personal investment in it. Plus, you have the introduction of Kane Hodder as Jason in what has to be his most badass design of the entire franchise, no doubt in my mind. So that one is at number 5. At number 4, we have the Friday the 13th remake. Just like many horror remakes of its ilk, the Friday the 13th remake, reboot, whatever, has suffered from some skewed judgment. Either you're upset because this one feels too much like the first 4 movies, or you're upset that Jason runs now and takes hostages. And in between that, you have people like me who really appreciated the dark, grimy cinematography that really grounded the Friday the 13th universe more realistically than really had been done, arguably, since the first one. Just as a horror film, this one does more to really submerge you in an atmosphere of dread. Now, it's certainly not a perfect remake. It mostly plays it safe, and I do like my remakes to be more on the daring side. I really want them to reinvent the material in more dramatic ways, because I don't want to see the same thing. And if you're doing a remake when you could obviously just do a sequel, it just seems like this is an opportunity to really bring something new, something groundbreaking to the table. But that's not what the filmmakers wanted to do. They just wanted to bring Jason back to his roots and make the Friday the 13th series more badass than ever. And in a lot of ways, I think they succeeded. You have a well-rounded and professional cast led by Jared Padalecki, who is a great protagonist to follow because he has such a sympathetic motivation. He's played with a lot of sincerity by Padalecki, and I do definitely consider him an improvement over the Hitchhiker character from Part 4. But honestly, the real reason that this one makes it this high in my ranking is because of Derek Mears as Jason Voorhees. He is honestly my favorite actor to portray the character. And even though he is definitely human, and Mears brought a lot of vulnerability to the character that we hadn't seen since Part 2, the intensity and ferocity with which he moved, the fact that he was a lot more cunning and resourceful this time around, only made that character more lethal and more terrifying. In essence, Derek Mears is simply a perfect Jason Voorhees, in my opinion. He did more to fully realize his character than I think any of his predecessors. However, my fanboying aside, this movie doesn't entirely work. It is uneven in certain ways, specifically because the pacing is pretty tedious this time around, because you're trying to ground Friday the 13th in a realistic universe, which I totally understand and I would be on board for, but you still have very much the same setup as those first 4 movies, with Jason just, taking out random people on a campsite, and that's just not a compelling enough motivation for this version of the character. That being said, do not mistake me, this is a damn fine slasher movie, a damn fine Friday the 13th movie. It is an excellent piece of horror filmmaking, and nobody can take that away from it. At number 3, you have Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. I don't think any other entry of this franchise did more to successively rejuvenate the creative energy for this franchise. After Part 5, you could really argue that this franchise needed a kick in the ass. And kick ass this movie did. It brought this new sort of dark meta humor to the franchise that it kind of was pioneered here. This is what really laid the groundwork for movies like Scream in the future. That really adds to the entertainment value. You have this flavor of like gothic atmosphere and style, which is also a great thing to sprinkle throughout. If I were to try to get somebody into the franchise, I would start by showing them Part 6. Honestly, I expected this to be at my number 1 spot, but upon recent viewings, the only thing that's held it back really for me personally is the fact that I just can't get on board with this portrayal of Tommy Jarvis. Again, Thom Mathews is a damn fine actor, but the characterization here, they just didn't really know how to reconcile this type of character who's really traumatized and almost demented, like how John Shepard portrayed him, with the new sort of frankly goofy tone that this movie sometimes ascribes to. And the tone is another thing. I compliment both the gothic horror and the dark meta humor, but those sort of work individually. The movie doesn't really unify into one cohesive style exactly. It does feel unbalanced to an extent. You have these really genuinely funny moments combined with Universal Monster-esque like atmosphere. So it never really blends together into one unified thing. For Very much like the Frankenstein monster, it's different bits stitched together very well. It's an extremely well put together movie, but it was a balancing act, and this movie falters at certain times. So that's why Part 6, as amazing as it is only number 3 on my ranking. Now we're down to 2. Which one is second? Which one is first? Well, you might be surprised. My number 2 pick is Friday the 13th Part 4. Often put at the very top of people's rankings for damn good reason. Friday the 13th Part 4 is just no way around it, an excellent horror movie. Director Joseph Zito really delivered a fantastically atmospheric, a truly brutal slash film. Even for the time, I have to imagine that some of these kills were really gut-wrenching to watch on screen. Not only because of the realism of the effects, but because of the fact that we are actually given characters to care about this time around. We have some of the most likable, funny, and unique characters to date. Not just Crispin Glover, who of course Crispin Glover's all over the frame everywhere. Even the supporting characters, who would usually fade into the background, are given more personality than you might expect, and are treated with the respect of actual characters instead of just fodder for a body count. Ted White is certainly my favorite Jason of the original series. He brought a lot of that menace that Derek Mears did, but instead of trying to realize Jason Voorhees as a really fleshed out character, he was just a badass force on screen. We have a wonderful protagonist in Tommy Jarvis, played by Corey Feldman, who really deserved more of the focus. Part of the problem with this movie is that you're given a handful of likable characters, but not really one that anchors the film. You're switching back and forth between many characters, and while I certainly find them all entertaining, I wish there was one to really follow, one to really guide us through the story. Because I don't really feel like I latch onto anybody quite the way I do with my number 1 pick. But aside from that minor complaint, as a slasher fan, as a horror fan, as a fan of this franchise, I admire the hell out of Part 4. And while the attempt to label this movie as the final chapter was laughable at best, I'm certainly glad it wasn't, because it led to so many other great sequels, though not one that would even compare to this one. So, with all that praise, with all the love I have for Part 4, what could top it? My number 1 pick is Friday the 13th Part 2. Yes, Part 2. Even I was surprised at doing this ranking. I knew I really loved Part 2. I knew it had a special place in my heart, but I didn't expect it to beat out Part 4. Then I revisited the whole series and I realized at a certain point that I was just more engaged with Part 2. Like I said, Part 4 could have benefited a little bit more by actually latching us on to a single protagonist that we could really get to know and we could really come to care for. And that's exactly what Part 2 does with Ginny, my second favorite final girl of all time, next to Sidney Prescott. But of the golden age of slasher movies, she is certainly not only for how resourceful she is and how she's able to manipulate Jason psychologically, but just with how much personality Amy still brought to that character. And that goes for every character. While I love the characters of Part 4, they're the type of entertaining that you would see in a comedy maybe. There are a lot of hilarious exchanges in Part 4, but if we're just talking about characters who I just didn't want to see die, then Part 2 just wins the day easily. I mean, my God, I'm still trying to figure out if Paul lived. I need to know if Paul lived. The only source of comfort that I have is that at least Ted survived. We know that. And as a horror film, this one still brings plenty of atmosphere, plenty of suspense. There are a lot of great cat and mouse chases between Jason and Ginny. Not the Jason that everybody would expect by this point, but still a very interesting one. Part 2 Jason, Sackhead Jason as many call him, isn't the most intimidating. He's not the force to be reckoned with that Ted White, Richard Broker, Kane Hodder, all those other guys were. But there's something alluring about the mystique surrounding this character. He's an extremely grounded portrayal of the character, and that makes you appreciate the character as a human being more so than the other movies of the original series. But really, it all comes back to that climax. Is this my favorite climax of a slasher film? It just might be. I have no end of praise for how much I love the tete-a-tete between Ginny and Jason. I mean, here you have this franchise that's constantly being mocked by Halloween fans as being this dumb, stupid, like lowest common denominator retread of Halloween. But then you have a climax like this that has more of a psychological element than any other slasher that I can think of. So guys, that's it. Thanks for watching. Hope you like this ranking. Whatever your ranking is, go ahead and comment below. I really want to get that debate going because unlike with other franchises, the ranking for Friday the 13th often really changes quite drastically with fans. So there's a lot of really fun talk to be had about that, and I just really love revisiting this franchise. That obviously means a lot to me. People again might mock this series for whatever reason. It's certainly never gotten any real critical recognition, but you know what? It stuck around for a good reason. And thank you guys for sticking around to watch my journey as I go through all these movies. So that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. Like if you want, subscribe if you want, and stay tuned for next time.